I just find that the sheer aesthetic of the way the blades are all laid down in a swirl in this kind of rhythmic movement is just something that I can't conceive of anything but some amazingly powerful higher force could do, you know.
And when something this magnificent is such a wonderful gift to us, we have to feel good about ourselves. Wow, we've been given this gift, and we can enjoy it and be grateful for it.
You've got to remember, everybody that walks into that field, the first thing they're going to do is be aware of how they feel. That's what these patterns do. They get you back in touch with that energy that is you, that feeling that's inside. I mean, heck, how long has it been since a lot of these people even contacted that side of themselves? And by going into these patterns, it makes you aware of yourself again. It gets you in touch with that feeling side, because humanity has become a little bit insensitive in a lot of ways. And the patterns are starting to help people to rediscover and redefine that sensitivity so that humanity can work as one again instead of little individual islands.
To me, even now, after having lived with this diagram for 2 years, my hair stands on end. I've got goosebumps because, you know, as a designer, if someone came to me and said, look, I want you to design a picture which has got 792 elements somehow and 504 elements, see if you can come up with something interesting. To come up with that, a perfect rotating DNA spiral, encoding those numbers, is in itself a work of genius. But then to find that in a wheat field in August, there, beautifully formed, and it seems to me the most sane way of dealing with this is to accept that this is a demonstration of a level of intelligence and compassion towards us, which is pulling us up. We have to look at the square in the face, and I think it's a truly extraordinary bit of intelligence and geometry.
Again, new seasons bring new crop circles with fresh original designs and new exciting geometry. A circle divided into 13 parts, or divided into 7, 11 and 13 parts. In addition to a row of new fantasy-filled patterns, many of these are pure logos that advertising agencies would demand a great deal of money to develop. Here we can pick and choose for free.
The two isotropic vector metrics coming together. Why is this geometry, for instance, the only geometry that's in perfect equilibrium? Well, I studied a little bit and I realized that actually if you have vectors of forces and you want to create equilibrium, then you would have obviously now this vector that just popped out could express a force, and we'd say that that force has this specific unit which relates to the length of the vector. So bigger the vector, stronger the force, smaller the vector, smaller the force. If you wanted equilibrium, you'd send another vector in the exact opposite direction at the exact same length and you'd get equilibrium. However, this would be a very precarious equilibrium. Nature could not use that equilibrium because any distortion would make the vector collapse. Any forces in any other direction would break the equilibrium. So it was very unlikely that the universe used that type of equilibrium. Well, what would it do? Because this is unstable. What would it do? Well, if you were trying to get an equilibrium yourself, you would probably say, well, I'll just keep adding vectors. Well, if you add vectors at 90-degree angle from the initial vectors, you're still not going to get equilibrium, because now what's going on is that the edge vectors are longer than the vectors to the center, so they're stronger, it implodes, it doesn't work. No equilibrium. So what would you do? you probably continue to add vectors, and you would probably put them at 45 degrees from the initial one. And now you have another problem, that is the edge vectors are shorter than the vectors to the center. Now the geometry explode, is still no equilibrium. So what would happen is that you would have to make sure that the geometry's edge vector and vectors to the center are the same length. And the only geometry in which this happens is like the snow crystals, the hexagon, where the edge vectors are the exact same length as the vectors to the center. And if we made a 3D hexagon together, we would get a vector equilibrium, which is made out of 12 vectors radiating from the center and 12 edge-bounded vectors that maintains the structure in perfect equilibrium, or 8 tetrahedrons coming together, all right, to create, you know, a vector equilibrium. So 8 of these coming together to create a vector equilibrium.
Symbols are about understanding what kind of world we live in, and it explains, it transmits the understanding of how the universe works and the kind of laws we're under. And this is actually a spiritual teaching. Mathematics will go into it and try to explain it from the point of view of matter, of the effect of that on the physical. The ancient knowledge is talking about principles and concepts behind the physical, you see. So to reach that level of understanding, you have to go above the physical. You have to rise your mind above what you can see, touch, feel, taste, and so on. You have to raise above the physical. And in that sense, you're learning, you're growing in understanding. The ancient expression, growing in understanding, that's exactly that. You grow in understanding. Whereas if you bring everything down to, oh, it's not laid properly, oh, it's not quite straight, you bring everything down and you don't look at the symbol, you just look at the physical aspect. You bring it down to your own level of what should be right and what should fit your idea, you know. But this is a chance now. We have to really begin to see the big picture.
Even if you think in advanced physics, for the physicists here, that, you know, of the structure of space, you could think that the vacuum state is going to infinity. At one point, it would have to reduce to the minimum amount of vector for stability, and that would be 12 vectors. So that's the fundamental, basic geometry of equilibrium, but it actually didn't fully work. That is, I still had points on the edge of my metric here, right? I still had vertices on the edge of my metric that had holes in it, right? So there was a symmetry. This middle structure with the 2 isotropic vector metric was completely filled, but the edge was not. So I had still a symmetry. I still didn't have equilibrium. So I started scratching my head some more, and I thought about it, and I thought about it, and I thought, okay, well, my only solution is to continue to add tetrahedrons until I get equilibrium at all levels.
It's striking that the basic geometrical forms such as circles, squares, triangles, pentagrams, etc. seem to create the basis for the construction in most of the patterns in crop circles. The principle of the golden section and ratio pi is often repeated in the constructions. Is it the geometry that is the key in understanding the phenomenon, or is it the phenomenon that is the key in understanding a deeper meaning in the geometry?
So I continued to add tetrahedrons. I covered the spaces that were open on the edge of the metric. So I had to add 3 tetrahedrons to every edge, which was 8. So that generated 24 more tetrahedrons. So remember, there's 20 tetrahedron in one isotropic vector metric. 2 makes it 40 plus 24 added up to 64 tetrahedron grid. And that's when it came to me. At 64, it all came together. Why is that? Because when I put those added 24 tetrahedron in my head as I was visualizing all this in my van, I realized what I had done. I realized that I had generated a vector equilibrium in the middle, but now I had generated a larger fractal vector equilibrium on the edge.